Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic, leader of the Fantastic Four. Victor Von Doom, Doctor Doom, monarch of Latveria. These two men are intrinsically linked, two sides of the same coin if you will. Both men have let their egos define their lives, but the main difference between the two is how they handled it. For Reed, he essentially decided to launch a test rocket he was working on early because the federal government was going to cut funding, despite the fact that his friend Ben Grimm warned Reed that the shield shielding wouldn't be enough to ensure a completely safe journey. Reed listened to his ego anyway, and as a result, well, you know what happened. This action humbled Reed, and as a result he never let his ego do the talking again. But Victor, well, he's a different story. Victor's life was never easy. His mom's soul was taken by Mr. One More Day, his dad froze to death protecting him, and he and his people were being constantly prosecuted by the Latvian monarchy for being Romani. Victor's acts of rebellion and proficiency with magic and science, but mostly science, got him enrolled in the same university which Reed happened to be attending at the time. They then started a rivalry which ended disastrously when Victor was developing a device which could contact his mother in hell, only for Reed to go through his notes and find miscalculations galore. However, the important part was that Victor caught Reed going through his notes, and let's just say tell him to go away would be quite the understatement. As a result, Doom's pride and ego led to the device literally blowing up in his face. He was expelled from university for conducting an experiment without authorization, but that wasn't even the worst part for Victor. Because what ended up happening was that his face was not left unscathed. To Victor, his face was ruined in the blast, and he decreed that it must not be gazed upon by the eyes of man ever again. But in reality, it was a decently thin scar, but Victor's pride was hopeless, so he covered his face with bandages and left America, in the process activating a self-destruct device and all the technology built for the government, which of course really pissed him off. Victor did a lot of things in that period of his life, but the main piece to note is while travelling around the world, he went to the Himalayan mountains in Tibet. He came out with the purpose of finding the Tibetan monks, not those guys, who lived there, and he did, and to make a long story short, they built armor for him, but he put on his mask while it was still burning, and as a result his face was fully scarred for real. Thus, Doctor Doom was born. He then went back to Latveria to conquer it, and then after succeeding, he set aside in the Fantastic Four after hearing that they were led by his beloved, Reed Richards, and the rest they say, is history. But that's just what happened on Earth 616. You see, Marvel has a tendency to make alternate universes in the hopes of gaining new readers. You can't easily jump into Marvel continuity which has been around since the 60s, or 30s if you count the timely and Atlas years. The point is that as a result, Marvel have all these secondary universes hanging around, ranging from the new universe in the 80s to Heroes Reborn of the 90s, or more relevant for this video, the two versions of the similar concept known as the Ultimate Universe. And this is where our story here truly starts, in Earth 1610, the first Ultimate Universe. Something to note about this Earth is that it was also intended to be a Marvel universe for the early 2000s, and also this version of Reed, along with the rest of the Fantastic Four, initially presented as younger than their 616 counterparts, with everyone in there being in their late teens, early 20s. I assume the reason why this change was made was to sort of recreate or combine the same type of lightning and ball effect that the Ultimate Spider-Man and Ultimate X-Men had, but I digress. The point is that from the get-go, Ultimate Reed was already different from his 616 counterpart, and the differences will only show more as things go on. Another major change made to Reed in 1610 is his father. Obviously, not being a time-traveling, dimension-hopping badass like the 616 counterpart would obviously be such a high bar to clear, but geez, Gary didn't even try. While Nathaniel helped nurture and raise Reed into a brilliant young genius, but ultimately had to leave for multiverse shenanigans, Gary hated it when Reed disassembled household appliances into cool machines and yelled and beaten him at times. So we're already off to a great start. Something to also note in particular is his mother, Mary, really did try and emotionally connect with Reed, but it wasn't really replicated because as much as she tried, she could never really understand him and his interest in advanced science, so Reed essentially saw her as a non-entity. However, Reed was able to have friends who didn't share his exact interests, because unlike in 616 where they met in college, in 1610, Ben Grimm was his childhood friend since the age of 5, and he would often defend him from bullies. 1610 Ben was the star linebacker for his middle school football team, which earned him the nickname of the Grim Reaper, which in turn earned him the respect of Gary, who was clearly the more sporty type, and he essentially liked Ben more than Reed, his actual son, who clearly had a negative effect on a boy genius. I'm willing to bet that some part of Reed was jealous of Ben, but at the same time he also felt a form of resentment towards Ward for not appreciating his genius, which would seem to be a common recurring part of his character. However, the neglect didn't stop Reed though, and during a high school science fair project, Reed showed off a prototype of a teleportation device he was working on which can teleport items to another dimension. When he demonstrated the device in action, the US government essentially found Reed and with his parents' permission, he was allowed to go to Science Hogwarts in the Baxter building, where he met a fellow students like Sue Storm and Victor Van Dam. Turns out the stuff Reed was teleporting for tests was ending up in a universe known as the End Zone, which is the Ultimate Universe version of the Negative Zone. Anyways, one thing in particular to note is in 1610, Victor goes for Reed's notes uninvited and that caused Reed to get mad and yell at him. Sound familiar? Looking back with the hindsight we have now, that was either a way to subvert expectations for long-time readers peeking into his new imprint or a glimpse of Reed and Doom by extension, Psyche. But I'll save that for later. Also, something else to note here is that Victor has a different upbringing to his 616 counterpart. According to his father, he was descended from Dracula and he beat Victor as well, which I think was supposed to parallel Reed, but I'm gonna be honest, not a lot is done with Ultimate Victor, which is kind of a missed opportunity in my opinion. Reed then goes to Victor's notes and he was impressed with what he wrote, so he invited him to work in the Endzone Teleporter project, and within approximately half a decade, a full-size teleporter was built. To mark the occasion, Reed invited Ben Grimm to Nevada to see how far they came from the days where Reed was doing this in his father's garage. However, as things usually are, this moment could not go smoothly, and just before they're about to teleport the apple to a military base in Guantino Bay, Victor essentially altered the coordinates because he thought they were wrong, and then led to the machine opening a dimensional rift which engulfed the five and gave them powers. But an important thing to note is that within this Reed's development in 1610 is that unlike in 616 where the accident that gave the full powers was entirely his fault, rather it was all entirely Victor's fault, and as a result Reed essentially absolved his guilt and never really got humbled the way the 616 counterpart did. Sure, it did something from feeling bad about it, it was trying to find ways to cure Ben, but in a sense Reed could never really fully blame himself for what happened. Also, a running theme for Ultimate Fantastic Four in general is that Reed is constantly being punished for his intellect in more ways than one. It starts with the affirmation abuse from his father, but never really does go away, because another major example is when they finally visit the Endzone in the latest story. It turns out that it's empty and desolate on the verge of dying, and its de facto ruler Niall is a tyrant who enslaves aliens for evil purposes. After Niall's death, it begins a shift for Reed that continues with the next major arc, where Reed is allegedly contacted by a 616 counterpart. 1610 Reed is delighted by this alleged path from him, because his apparent 616 counterpart is talking about a possible future you could have with Sue, with them married with children. In a sense, this Reed is feeding 1610 Reed with affirmations and essentially promising a future career as a superhero, which feeds his ego to an insane degree. But would it surprise you if I told you this wasn't 616 Reed feeding him misinformation? Rather, the zombie Reed essentially kind of catfish 1610 Reed, opening the dimension up so the zombies can eat everyone there. That twist blew my mind when I first read it, and let me tell you, this was years after the original comics came out, where I was essentially reading pre-owned Ultimate Universe trade paperbacks my dad's work friend somehow had. Anyways, it also continued a theme of Reed's character arc that behind every new discovery there's always something sinister behind the curtain. Oh, we found Namor. Turns out he's a criminal from Agent Atlantis. Oh, we tried back in time to put the correct codes in the teleporter, perhaps preventing Ben from being trapped in his thing form. Whoop, turns out they created an awful time where the Skrulls essentially betrayed humanity and killed everyone. Oh, there's alternate universes out there which could potentially have a way to cure Ben. Uh-oh, it turns out the probes that Reed sent had some biomass along the way, now it's killing everyone in the Supreme Power universe. It went on and on and on for the Fantastic Four, and after encountering them Faust in the Cosmic Cube, Reed thought he went through everything bad the universe had to offer. But before we talk about Ultimatum and the effects it had on Reed, I want to turn attention to a more obscure tale which I think fits in very well with Reed's descent. So there's another alternate future set 20 years later in which a version of Ultimatum happened, which resulted in the death of Johnny Storm, which pushed that version of Sue over the edge and eventually became a major dictator of that universe, doing things like using Reed's machine he made to restore Ben Grimm to human form by removing the powers of various mutants, and setting up a prison in the negative zone. The X-Men, now a group of freedom fighters, travel back in time with the intent to kill Reed so he doesn't make the machine, even though they should logically be going after Sue instead, but I digress. One thing to know about this group of X-Men is that Franklin Richards is one of them, which I honestly think made Reed even more certain that he and Sue would end up together. After all, if two possible futures showed evidence of that, then it's bound to happen. Right? Also, another thing I find really interesting about the story is that Sue is essentially one who went over the edge, not Reed. But what's meant for him is that he knew, or rather thought, no matter what they'd go for, the love of each other would persist and maintain, and it would survive the ultimatum, or whatever that was. Right? It did not survive the ultimatum. Because literally the second before Reed decided to propose to Sue, Magneto decided to do something about the Earth's magnetic poles or something, which leads to a lot of worldwide devastation, mainly massive waves in New York City which kill a lot of people. Sue tried to hold the water back with a force field, but it was so powerful it put her in a coma, but while it was happening to Sue, Reed went after Namor, thinking he was the one who caused it. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, Ultimatum is bad, but still had a lot of consequences in the long run, because one of them was the dissolving of the Ultimate Fantastic Four, because Dr. Storm, who served as Reed's partial mentor figure, also died in the wave, and during the funeral, Reed attempts to do the most stupid thing anyone could ever do in this position, and proposed to Sue right now, but he was rightfully rejected. Many people cited that as a straw that broke the camel's back for Reed, and was the beginning of his descent as a maker, which I can see, because to Reed it meant that his promised future was ripped right away from him due to circumstances he couldn't control, but I believe another major incident was after learned that Victor, or rather Mary Storm, soon joins him out due to a retcon, was responsible for orchestrating the events of the ultimatum. He checked multiple situations to see if Victor was capable of doing any good, but there wasn't any ones with good outcomes, so he indirectly first took his first life by sending Ben to kill Doom, and presumably second kills because we don't see Namor again after this. Anyways, that marked the end of the Ultimate Fantastic Four, and the beginning of something more sinister for Reed was on the horizon. So throughout the video, you might have noticed that you haven't really seen me bring up Ultimate Doctor Doom that much time in passing, and as I said before, it wasn't really that relevant. That's caused well by accident or on purpose. The writers behind the Ultimate Universe probably realized they had a golden opportunity in their hands. They could essentially sabotage Ultimate Doctor Doom by essentially turning Reed into Doom, and that they most certainly did. Enter The ultimate enemy. Ever since the Fantastic Four disbanded, Reed was kind of bumming around his old family house, making scientific breakthroughs and mentally spiraling until he learned from the ultimate version of Kang that the world was going to end, which once again reaffirmed his worldviews, but this time for the worst. After that revelation, he spent the next 6 months planning and developing something which I think was supposed to benefit the world, but in reality it was just bombing significant places like his family house to fake his death, killing his family in the process. Other places that were bombed included Triskelion, Project Pegasus, and Peter Parker's house for some reason. Anyways, to make a long story short, the heroes of the Ultimate Universe stop Reed's unclear planet and he's left floating in a pocket dimension. I found the bombing of Reed's own house really intriguing because he's essentially telling the world he's cutting his ties to own humanity in the pursuit of world betterment and the sustainability of science. But in reality he's clearly doing everything to sustain his own ego, kinda like some familiar. Anyways, after that happened, the next time we see Reed, he's become someone different. He christened himself as the Maker, fully given to his derived god complex. From here, we'll be calling Reed the Maker, just to avoid confusion from when more multiverse stuff happens. Anyways, the Maker made his way back to Earth 1610 by using the actual brains of his dead alien soldiers as a power source, and began a sciencey cult called the Children of Tomorrow. They are essentially a twist on 616 Reed's future foundation, because while Reed did this to nurture and grow the minds of tomorrow, Maker did this to quote-unquote fix the world. But it's clear that the Children of Tomorrow are eugenicist zealots, because one of the first things they do is commit genocide in Asgard as like a way of devouring 4. It is here I think the Maker is at his most Doom-like, being this ruler of a nation, is also a massive egotistical hypocrite because he claims to be working towards a better tomorrow, while indulging in aggressive behaviors like blocking the city's intelligence to ensure he's smarter than it and retaliating against the United States with a child designed specifically to be a suicide bomber. As the Maker's plans fall apart around him, Thor brings in the foul nail of the coffin, Sue Storm. As the Maker rants and grovels, Sue responds by trapping him in a small bubble. After that whole thing, the Maker would then join the aforementioned Kang and assemble a group of Dark Ultimates who would then search for the ultimate version of the Infinity Gems. But it's not really important for my analysis, so I'll summarize it. It ends with the Dark Ultimates getting defeated and Kang vanishing, never to be seen again, which is incredibly disappointing because Ultimate Kang is essentially a future Sue Storm. No, not that one. And since she's the one who essentially made the Maker, pun intended, more could have been done with her. But alas, the world is a cruel place. Anyways, the next big arc for the Maker is Ultimate Cataclysm, in which after Age of Ultron, the space can continue its screwy, but the main thing to note is it brings 616 Galactus into 1610. The Ultimate Universe dealt with a version of Galactus before, a space insect being known as Gar-Lark-Tuss. The 7th Reed was still part of the Fantastic Four, and in particular this is where the certain monologue comes from. You know what? I didn't. I stayed like a good little nerd. Now I'm one of the 12 smartest guys on Earth. I'm then the hottest girl on the planet. And the old jock who played ball at school, he's standing right in front of me, asking for my help. This is yet another example of Reed's ego always being there, even before he became the Maker. Anyway, 616 Galactus gets fused with 1610 Galactus to create an even more powerful Galactus. So Earth 1610 is kinda fucked. The Ultimates essentially find out that Galactus came from Earth 616, and the Maker volunteers to go with Miles Morales to get something from there. Upon arriving at the 616 Baxter building, the Maker gazes upon a photo of their Fantastic Four, essentially showing them what he could have and should have been. They get the files, and on their way back, they encounter Valerie Richard. This impacts Reed, because once again he's looking at an example of a promised future, one that's been dangling over since it was Mr. Fantastic. And this apparently inspired the Maker to try to atone for his sins, even though at this point he literally committed genocide. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, this apparent redemption arc sucks. I sort of like the basic idea behind it, but this man committed so many atrocities at this point, so it just doesn't work at all, in my opinion. Maybe it's supposed to solidify that there's simply no going back for the Maker, how his promised future will literally never happen, but in the practice it just falls flat, so we're glossing over in this video. What's important to know is that in canon he was actually faking it, and he used his advantage because under that assumption Nick Fury such a game position, authority, and shield, because he wanted him to come up with a lot of contingency plans in case bad things happen, you know, basic stuff. But in secret the Maker was rebuilding a city under Manhattan, and while doing this he learned of something really fascinating. Basically, to make a long story short, Earths sort of across the multiverse are colliding for each other, which triggered a universal level extinction event or something. The Maker basically destroyed multiple Earths in order to protect 1610 somehow. The number of Earths he destroyed at this point was... wait, what? 6, 7? Sorry, I didn't know what got into me. Anyways, Maker was about to destroy another universe, but before he could, it was destroyed prematurely. Maker then made an alliance with the Cabal, a group assembled by Namor of 616 to essentially destroy other worlds and survive the incursions. One thing I find super interesting is that 616 Thanos is a member of the Cabal, and it isn't the first time the Maker has worked with a version of Thanos before. In 1610, the Thanos thing I mentioned earlier was essentially Ultimate Universe Thanos forcing Reed to make a cosmic cube. Ending with Thanos dying and the cube being locked in a time loop thing, but that's neither here or there. The point is that before Reed was working against Thanos by making a cube he doesn't kill him, Reed is now working Thanos to further his own goals. I don't think it was intentional, but this parallel is something I've come to really adore. Anyway, Anyways, the Maker essentially made something stolen from 616 known as a life raft, a giant construct with the purpose of getting people to survive the incursions. This all leads into the 2015 event known as Secret Wars. You might have heard of this one already, but for those who haven't, here's a summary of what happens. The Marvel multiverse is fully destroyed, but Doctor Doom of Earth-616 finds a way to kill the godlike beings bound in the incursion, known as the Beyonders, and kills them with the help of Molecule Man, and Doctor Strange steals that power. To me, this is the book, which shows how far the Maker has fallen, how much he's become like Doom, because it has him reacting to both 616 Reed and Victor in the strange new world known as Battleworld. As you all might hopefully know, this is the story where Victor becomes God Emperor Doom. Also in Battleworld, there's probably no other Reed Richards variant that Victor is aware of, but that's disproven by the tie-in, so we'll probably ignore that tidbit for now. What does matter is that Victor essentially stole Reed's family away from him by marrying a variant of Sue who's in the Fantastic Four without Reed. Something I always find pretty interesting is that when 616 Victor first becomes aware of the Cabal, who are fighting a bunch of fours, don't ask. He doesn't seem to register that a Reed is among them, but when the heroes of the 616 Laugh Raft arrive during the commotion, Victor immediately notices his Reed, which makes him immediately teleport to the place they were fighting. I know for a fact that Maker's ego must have been bruised there. To make a long story short, Victor killed Cyclops, who had Phoenix powers at this point, and Stephen Strange, who was essentially Victor's right-hand man and sheriff in Battleworld, scattered the heroes and the Cabal over the Patrol planet. It is here that the Maker gets to finally properly interact with his 616 counterpart, with no zombie catfishing included. It's here that we get a few great Maker moments, with him clearly on to Reed's attitude and ideas. The both are essentially trying to defeat Victor, but due to Reed being a hero and the Maker being a villain, they tend to disagree a lot. At this point, the Reeds are orchestrating a free revolution from Battleworld to distraction. There's a few stumbles along the way, but it's going well for the most part. But as the duo encounters the Molecule Man, long story, the Maker essentially decides to betray Reed by putting him in a temple that devolves into a primitive. It seems like at this point in his life, the Maker finally accepted life was never going to turn out the way he wanted, kinda like Victor in a way. As 616 Reed was being emotional when talking to the Susan variant, so he'd like to take the Molecule Man's power for himself. But then Owen, the Molecule Man, sliced the Maker into pieces, defending Reed and restoring him, in case you're wondering what happened after it was devolved. That's what could have been the end of the Maker if the multiverse wasn't remade. When the multiverse was remade, the Maker essentially was in essence reborn in each new reality, one mind having multiple bodies. So see that we enter an experimental phase for the Maker, as he tries out multiple schemes primarily for control over the new multiverse. One particular scheme had him face against a team of Avengers while heading a scientific/terrorist organization known as Whisper, where he would plant nano-cameras inside the Avengers base at the time. Then the team's leader, Sunspot, aka Roberto da Costa, revealed that he knew about the camera and spent the entire story essentially dog-walking on the Maker and being in his own game, which obviously really pissed him off. Another scheme he had was essentially destroy the Superflow, essentially the space to separate every universe in the multiverse. But that plan was foiled by two sets of Ultimates, the 1610 team and a 616 team calling themselves by that same name. Eventually the 1610 team elected to hunt down all his bodies in the multiverse and kill them. After something involving the Future Foundation, the Maker essentially submitted an application for the Council of Reed, but they rejected it because he essentially couldn't return to his home dimension. So he was building a portal with the express purpose of getting back to 1610. It was unstable and would not hurt him if he travelled there, but after coming across a damaged sample of the Ultimate Venom symbiote, he liked to find a way to restore it to full so he can teleport back to his own dimension. Thus, his involvement in Kate's Venom run began, and again, to make a very long story short, he was successful in his plans and managed to get back to 1610, which was in the flames at that point for some reason. At the time of writing, still unknown what's currently happening in 1610, but this brings it back to the body that was defeated by Roberto, who's currently being held in a damage control prison. A team of mercenaries were hired to break him out by a team of therapists, the Maker essentially mentally reprogrammed to send the coordinates and plan his escape. Once free, the Maker then kind of fused the mercenaries together to create a false body for himself and went to the 616 Baxter building and stole a data bank full of heroes of 616. Then made a giant teleportation device with the purpose of traveling the universe of similar markings to the mainstream 616, meaning that things there had essentially the potential to turn out similar there with the Marvel Age of Heroes. This obviously got the attention of 616 Reed, which then sparked quite the fascinating conversation between the two. Just as the Maker was traveling to this new universe, Earth 6160, he asked Reed a curious question. If the roles were reversed, if he was in the Maker's place, then when we erase him from existence? After some brief hesitation, Reed said yes, to which the Maker responded with, "I'll keep that in mind." Earth 6160, the new Ultimate Universe. Okay now, so I've been watching this video for about 21 minutes now, and I bet you're wondering by now, if this video is called A Tale of Two Reeds, then why have we only been talking about just the Maker and nothing else? That's because of our second read now, the Reed Richards of 6160, or Doom as he calls himself for reasons I'll get into. But to explain Ultimate Doom, I need to explain the entire deal of Earth 6160. Because as I said before, this universe had the markings end up similar to Earth 616. They even had a Golden Age during World War II, but just before the Marvel Age of Heroes began, the Maker would essentially use a time machine of sorts, known as an Immortus engine, to essentially change everything in his image, and using the dial bank to essentially stop Marvel Age before it even began. The Maker would then establish himself as the ruler of 6160 and set up a new city in that area. Sound familiar? A monarch ruling from that area? But arguably, one of the worst things he has ever done is what he did to that Reed of that universe. 6160 Reed is essentially similar to 616 counterpart, but different in some ways, like bunking of Ben Grimm as a teenager during college and working on a classified project on the cosmic radiation storm which gave their team the powers in 616. However, Reed's calculations were off because the Maker changed them, so as a result the four missed their chance and essentially never became fantastic, so Reed's life essentially collapsed. Johnny died on the way back, Sue developed cancer, and Ben seemingly killed himself, although I'm gonna assume the Maker has something to do with that more directly. Instead of going to prison, Reed was essentially transferred to the city, where the Maker would then torture him, disfigure him, remove his capability for joy, and force him to call himself to call him Doom. This is fascinating because I read into this as the Maker essentially projecting all his insecurities and feelings into this new Reed, punishing him for essentially having the potential to live a life he never could. Something that's also a recurring theme of the Maker that I've noticed, something that also matches up with 616 Doom. Looking for the opportunity to do some good in the world, but to change the things for the better, but their pride and their egos were undoing. Anyways, the world of 1610 is essentially divided on 7 major territories ruled together by a secret council under the Maker. After studying history within the city, the Maker came to the conclusion that long-term peace is impossible, so he essentially got the council leaders to orchestrate fake conflicts and alliances to make the citizens more inclined to accept this new world. Something quick to also know about the Maker is he's still petty as hell, and never let go of Roberto styling him that one time, so ensure that his 6160 counterpart had a really shitty life, essentially forcing him to be a living power source for his father Emmanuel. He's also one of the council leaders. Anyways, the Maker then got curious and traveled from the future of that world, where he encountered this world's version of Kang the Conqueror. Kang then attacked the Maker and nearly killed this body, managing to barely survive with a broken immortal ascension and an impaired memory. And after attack from some temporal time-traveling super soldiers, the Maker essentially got 6160 Doom and Howard Stark to work another Immortus engine together. While working on the device, we get more insight into 6160 Doom and the fact that the Maker has been torturing him in various ways, as I mentioned before. Most importantly, that 6160 Doom doesn't know that the Maker is an alternate version of him. To make a long story short, Howard and Doom essentially sabotage the city, letting Kang and the soldiers into the city, causing a massive fight between the Children of Tomorrow and Kang's army. Then Doom essentially locks Kang into the city for 2 years, along with the Maker. Something else I also find interesting and kind of wanted to note real quick is that Howard's story in Ultimate Invasion kind of mirrors Tony Stark's traditional origin, with him being forced to build something from an enemy, but then betraying the aforementioned enemy and fighting them. The only difference is that his Yinsen, 6160 Doom, essentially escapes in the end, while Howard is trapped in the city alongside the Maker and Kang. This directly leads into the Ultimates, probably my favorite out of the new Ultimate titles. It's so interesting seeing the ramifications of the Maker's trampling of reality throughout this new universe. Something I always like to see for alternate universe stories, especially in a world as big as Marvel. But back to Doom, he's essentially found this version of the Ultimates of 6160 Tony, who's Iron Lad in this universe. Another thing I love about this new title, it's the exact opposite of the original Ultimates book. For Alan being government agents, they are freedom fighters up against an oppressive government. Also, Doom is also working on something known as Project 4, which is essentially a way to recreate the Fantastic Four. Doom started the project by testing off some mice, but he hasn't really been fully able to crack it yet. Another thing to note is that 6160 Doom suffers from a depression, sorrow of life that could have been that was ripped away from him, kinda like the Maker. He feels specters of Sue, Ben, and Johnny around him, which represent the family he could have had and what should have had or should have been. But the thing separates them from each other is while the Maker is a narcissistic genocidal arsehole, 6160 Doom is a bit more sorrowful. I suffer from periods of extreme despair. During these periods, it is as if I am oppositely changed. Lost in an all-consuming universe where nothing is possible. I call it my negative zone. It ties back to the conversation 616 where you type the Maker before you travel to 6160, because the Maker essentially raised Mr. Fantastic from being a thing in 6160. One particular thing Doom also did early in the Ultimates run was essentially this. The Ultimates essentially got wind that there was superpowers prisoners being held and tortured in prison, and everyone but Doom, he stayed behind, was brought in for this rescue mission. But turns out it was set up by this version of Hulk, who's one of the council members, to kill all Ultimates in one fell swoop, and it worked. But Doom essentially used the Immortus engine he stole from the Maker City, which due to failed first attempt to make a superpowered army strong enough to for the government, was kept off limits before this, essentially save the team from dying. The team didn't even know that initially, and Doom didn't really want to explain right away. When confronted about it, he argued with Tony, telling me we're all running out of time and there wasn't really enough that had been done yet. So Tony agreed and essentially decided to go things in a different way. I'm sorry if I'm summarizing too much, but that's basically what happened. But while 6160 Doom lost his family, he created many more Project 4s completed, which was essentially a way to give groups of 4 powers of cosmic rays. One of my favorite 6160 Doom moments comes in issue 17 of the Ultimates, where Doom essentially talks to Hank Pym of 6160. This version of Hank isn't a super genius like most of his other counterparts, because he got into a car accident, and he's also a bit more uncertain of his status as a superhero, or freedom fighter in this case. At this point, Doom learned that the Maker is an alternate version of himself from Miles Morales, and he felt like quitting the Ultimates due to feel mentally unstable with that revelation. But Hank essentially comforted him by talking about his alternate variants. Ghosts? I see those sometimes. Only for me, it's the guy who was before the accident. I don't think they'll ever go away. If I could just kind of follow you around forever. You just really bother me. This thing I couldn't shake. Then one day, I had this thought, and I felt better ever since. Just because you're broken, doesn't mean you need to be fixed. I've seen a lot of people really want to know what happened to the 6160 Victor Von Doom. Well, I understand them, I don't think really do need to know. Because we already have a version of Reed and Doom for this new world. Only that Reed is evil and Doom is good, and ultimate versions of Reed who had their life destroyed within circumstances they could not control. But while Omega became those exact circumstances, Doom essentially joined a group of freedom fighters, ensuring that no one would suffer like he did ever again. Reed Richards, the Maker, Ruler of Earth 6160. Reed Richards, Doom, Freedom Fighter. These two are linked, two sides of the same coin if you will. One is a mega maniacal extremist with hatred towards the imperfect, and the other is a broken soul determined not to let the same thing that happened to him happen to anyone else. At the time of writing, Ultimate Endgame isn't out yet, so it's not clear what the final confrontation will be like, but one thing for certain is that Doom deserves a happy ending. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed this massive video for today, make sure to like and subscribe. I've got lots of video ideas in my head, I really want to do them all, like as usual, and as per usual, have a good day.